Please join me welcoming Kiana.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Kiana, right? Professor Shim said that, but how I like to do this is be interactive. So if you have questions about mobile, product management, emerging tech, just go ahead and shout it out. What I'm going to try to do is walk you through the modern history of smart app technology, through the phones and all that good stuff. You'll see that my slides start in 2009, and that's really because that's when Gartner and all the big research firms start really tracking mobile platforms and mobile usage. So, because before that really was all about RIM and a little bit about Palm and Symbian, but really about RIM. So here you see a breakdown of what was going on in the market in December of 2009. Just for some context over here, 2007 is when the first iPhone product came out. 2008 was when the App Store launched. November 2008, Open Handset Alliance. This is very important. This was a group of, led by Android, handset developers, software firms, and so on and so forth. And what they did was, in contrast to Apple's closed system, they decided to do an open system built on the Android platform, so everybody could use the same system and they didn't have to come up with their own proprietary. So this is really key and essential, and you'll see as time goes by how important that decision for Android was. Earlier, in September 2008, Android Market came into play. One of the key phones at that time was the HTC Dream. Does anybody remember that phone? Cool. Yes, I actually met my husband. He had an HTC Dream in the club, and I wanted to see it. And that's the rest of the story. It's very important to me.
Stick around. I'm showing you my presentation.
So in January 2009, Palm, anybody familiar with Palm? Great. So Palm, prior to this time, they were kind of chasing on the heels of RIM. They were doing basic QWERTY keyboard type functionality, you can check your email, all that good stuff. The Palm Pre was their response to what was going on in terms of the touchscreen and the smartphones and the applications. They put together a beautiful phone with beautiful applications. We actually did one at Fandango. This never took off. I had a couple friends that had it. I said, don't buy that because it's not going to take off. And within a year, gone, out of the picture. At that same time, around that same time in 2008, BlackBerry, RIM, which most people are very familiar with at this time. If you've had a phone, you probably had this type of phone. They decided to push into apps and touchscreen devices as well. They did the disastrous BlackBerry Storm. Did not work out very well. The touchscreen just didn't make a lot of sense. It was hard, it was clunky. It was in direct contrast to their core user, that core BlackBerry user that wanted to have a QWERTY keyboard. So it was just kind of a disaster. Wait, does anybody have a BlackBerry Storm still or had one and loved it? Good, sorry, yeah. So as you can see, that's kind of a little bit of history, and this is how things were framing up in 2009. So RIM still had a large line share of the marketplace. Apple had a large share. Microsoft had a large share, but this was Microsoft Windows Phone. This is prior to Windows 7 and Windows 8. So this was their first, push into that. So a lot of enterprise type customers had this phone. You can see the number for that Google Android, that 5.2%. Open Handset Alliance, go back to that in the next screen. And then of course Palm and Symbian narrowed it out. Now Symbian at the time, I should have said this, Symbian was really international focused. They still are today. The folks that use that phone for the most part are still internationally based for the most part. Oh, I'm sorry, before I move on, are there any questions about 2009? All right, so look what happened to Google Android in 2010. This is the direct conclusion of joining that Open Handset Alliance, because what that did was that allowed for multiple manufacturers and multiple people to build against the Android platform, so they were able to reach a whole bunch of different users with different interests, form factors, price points, so on and so forth in a very relatively short period of time. At the same time, Apple grew a little bit. RIM fell off quite a bit. So did Microsoft, so did Palm. Cinnamon isn't even on the map anymore. Still big and international, but with the growth of Android and Apple, it really kind of displaced itself overall. At the same time, the iPad was released in April, so a lot of fun at that time. And then iOS 4 was released in the marketplace. What's interesting about iOS 4 is before that, the iPhone, as cool and as sexy and as innovative as it was, it didn't have a lot of core functionality that you would expect. You would expect to be able to read an email and listen to Pandora at the same time. Up until 2010, you couldn't do that on that phone, so it was a really big update. At that time as well, iOS 4 is the first time that we had parity across OSs for phone and tablet. That's really important from a developer perspective because now you could do universal apps. You didn't have to do a separate code base for phone and tablet, which, you know, is a lot of development time and resources. At that same time, Android was also making really big moves in terms of their OS support. Really from the end of 2009 through 2010, they did 3 major updates of their OS. This is really important because when Android first came out, the benefit of that open handset alliance and the kind of the downfall of that was that because there were so many different form factors and different forks, they had the core functionality the same, but if you were a developer at that time, you know, it was a challenge to be able to support Android because there was so much variance in the market. I mean, it was just frustrating. I remember that. Not very fun, but I definitely remember those days. In the same year, Windows Phone 7 came out. Does anybody have a Windows Phone 7 device? Yay. Okay, so what Microsoft tried to do with Windows Phone 7, and I can tell you this because I was there, I was working at Fandango at the time, and they were trying to get some of their top providers into their catalog. And so what they said, what they were trying to do with Windows Phone 7 is appeal to rich consumers. That was their whole market speech to us. And so I'm thinking to myself, well, that's probably not going to work out. There's a little bit more you have to think about in terms of, you know, delivering a viable product to the marketplace. And I'm sure they were thinking a little bit more, but to tell us developers and product managers that, I felt like it was a little bit short-sighted. What they did with Windows Phone 7 is they completely abandoned those Windows Phone users that were there before, so they couldn't upgrade. If you wanted Windows 7, you had to get a new device because it just wasn't backwards compatible. Not a good move. Mike. And so here you see that little slice of palm is slowly going away, that beautiful phone that nobody would just download and use. All right, so here in 2011, a lot of things happened. This was the time that this Google Android, this piece of the pie, folks really had to start noticing Android. And like I said before, because they did so much with supporting their OS and making it more developer friendly, it was actually easier to develop applications on that platform. When you have more applications, you get more users, so it all worked out for them. Microsoft at 5.6 is rolling along. They introduced Windows 7.5, an okay update, but really not on par with what Android and Apple was doing at the time. At this time, this was the year that Steve Jobs passed away. You know, a lot of people say, you know, that was a visionary. After that, what happens to Apple when your visionary passes away? How can you move on? Can you do it? And in my personal opinion, you know, it's yet to be seen. You know, Steve Jobs was definitely a visionary, definitely had a solid eye for what the consumer wanted around mobile. And if you see the growth and the type of things that Apple was doing post Steve Jobs era, you know, it's a little bit questionable in my opinion, which is my opinion. You can see BlackBerry RIM continuing to go down. All right, so moving up to December of 2012, the iPad mini is released at this time. The beautiful thing about the iPad mini is the form factor that they use for the core iPad, you could use the same form factor for the iPad mini. For those of us who are developers and product managers, that means that all we had to do was just buy an iPad mini and just make sure our app looked as expected, and it generally did. So that was a good, smart, beautiful move by iPad in introducing a new product to market. Android Jelly Bean comes into place. That's an OS update. That one is somewhat significant, but what was really significant about Android is they brought this cutting-edge phone, the Nexus 7. Does anybody have a Nexus 7? Well, that's cool. So the Nexus 7 was really kind of top of the line, like in terms of features and functionality and capability and beautifulness and style. It really was kind of the starting of the era of competing against Apple in terms of style and design for phones. It's a really important thing to do. It wasn't just about price points and market divergence anymore. At the same year, Windows abandoned its Windows 7 users, just like they did the Windows Media users before that, and released Windows Phone 8 to the marketplace. Windows Phone 8 is not backwards compatible, so all those Windows 7 users that took a chance basically got pushed to the wayside. But the interesting thing about Windows Phone 8 is that there's also Windows 8 OS that goes along with that, and that's actually for tablets and desktops. So there were some cool opportunities to do things across all of the full spectrum of your platform. So we did a little bit around there, but still lacking in terms of overall usage and adoption. Except for in Seattle. I'm from Seattle. Every time I go to visit there for Christmas, I swear everybody has a Windows phone. And then I realized, oh yeah, Microsoft's there, that's why. Are there any questions about 2012? All right, so I've got a little bit on 2013 and I'll talk through 2014. So what you see here is the same trajectories. What's happening is Google and Android still has a very large percentage of the marketplace, followed closely by Apple. I say closely even though it's about 20 percentage points because Apple is only competing with 3 form factors where Android is competing with multiple form factors. Not only the phone, but your Kindle Fires and your Nooks and all those other different Android tablet manifestations. So, really neck and neck. Other than that, BlackBerry continues to go down. The 1 billion of losses, 4,500 job cuts. The BB10. Anybody have a BB10 phone? Oh, good. When I saw that and they did their presentation to us about, hey, this is going to be the phone of the future and all that stuff, it was like, no, they did some of the good core things that BlackBerry users like, but it was amazingly complicated to use because you had your enterprise screen and then your regular screen and you had to figure out how to go back and forth. They had the half keyboard, the half touch screen, so they were trying to kind of hit it middle market and just kind of failed on both sides, in my opinion. What's also happened in 2003 in terms of App Store downloads. So in May, Apple announced their 50 billion App Store downloads. Right? 2 months later in July, Android announced theirs. So you can see what's happening. It's all converging together. These are the leaders, and there's people behind, but this is really where things are going into the foreseeable future. Oops, that's it.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Can you explain what form factor is?
So form factors are just like different ways that the platform can manifest itself with OS. So like in the case of Android, they have, they have a small form factor for phones, then they have a medium tablet size, a large tablet size, and an extra large tablet size. For iOS, they really have 2 form factors. They have a phone, and that serves, the iPhone as well as the iPad, and then they have an iPad form factor, and even though they have the iPad mini, it has the same resolution, so you really just have 2 that you're working with. Are there any questions about the smartphone history and all that good stuff?
I'm just surprised BlackBerry is still hanging on.
Yes.
It's really pointless.
Do you know who uses BlackBerry still?
Well, there's still.
BlackBerries? Okay.
Because I don't have.
It's got to be for work. It's got to be for work.
It has to work.
Some companies still have.
I have a friend that works for Porsche actually, and they all have company Blackberries.
Right. We have certain CEOs at our company that still refuse to give up their BlackBerry, so we continue to support it to make sure that he can access the content. And that we'll see how things go. There's going to be our die-harders who have, always wanted to have that QWERTY keyboard and type and do that.